I've been into bikes since I've been about 8 years old. Uh, Never got out of it and just kind of stuck to it and went through different phases of cycling through uh, when I was, 8, 9, 10, just skidding and jumping on a basic coaster brake kind of pre BMX bike to building ramps and imitating Evil Knievel, building, jumping over my friends and things. Uh, and then later on, heard about BMX and went and entered BMX races and started getting into that and got a nice BMX bike. Let's see, after BMX, I got into freestyle, flatland freestyle, and a little bit of ramp riding and then street. Started working at a bike shop, job at a bike shop, and it just kept going where I never got out of bikes and just stayed into it the whole time. In the bike shop, we started seeing these mountain bikes come through, and I kind of looked at them as big BMX bikes with gears. So I went ahead and rode them and eventually bought one, got into that, got into mountain biking, got a job at another bike shop, left the shop, got a job at GT Bicycles in Huntington Beach when they were growing and kind of developing new suspension models, and I learned a lot there. From there, after GT, I went and opened up a couple of bike shops. After about 5 years at GT, we opened up a couple of bike shops and ran those for a while, and then eventually sold them and started up Jones Bikes. And I started building custom bicycles for people however they wanted them. And then very quickly, I developed my own bikes that I wanted to ride. And people started asking me for that. In between building for customers, I was developing these new bikes with the truss fork, the space frame, the H-bar, different geometry. And then I decided I didn't want to build any more bikes for other people the way they wanted them because I liked making them, but a lot of the time I didn't like some of the ideas behind the bikes, like building a bike to be suspension corrected. I built one bike where it could have a front suspension fork or it could be rigid. And it rode okay with the suspension fork, but when I rode it with the rigid fork, it didn't ride as well because it was made to be both at the same time, and the geometry wasn't right for a rigid bike. And that's one thing that taught me that I wanted to stay dedicated to rigid bikes instead of front suspension because the handling was better, but you have to build the frame and fork to match. And that is one thing different with my frame sets than most bikes out there, because most bikes are designed around a suspension fork. The trails I was riding when I developed these were, and the trails I still ride are mainly mountain roads with a lot of single track in between. So riding long forest road climbs, fire roads, truck roads, and then dropping into some technical single track, very narrow, lots of trees, rocks, tight turns, drop-offs, bumps, kind of just tight trails that aren't ridden a lot. There's not a lot of people out there. It's not a place where a lot of people go. So it tends to be very narrow and tight. The evolution of my bikes, really, it came down to me going out into the woods right over the hill here, riding a bike, and then going home, thinking about it, making some notes, and making another bike. And it was around 10 bikes of my own that I built for me, and then probably about 6 bikes that went out to customers that I kept changing the geometry, going further and further with it. I took one bike really far, a couple bikes kind of past where I thought might be right as far as the geometry, and then pulled it back, and that's where I am now. I have 2 models of bikes with 2 different geometries because I wanted to go out and ride these bikes on these trails the best I possibly could. Clean every uphill, go down everything, never put a foot down, go fast through the corners, not crash, and just basically have a good time and be one with the bike. And it's funny that a bicycle with no suspension and a funny looking handlebar, it ends up being that. But when I go out there with people on full suspension bikes, they seem to be struggling on a lot of this stuff because it's harder in the corners, it's harder to brake hard and turn, at least on these trails. A bicycle is a tool, like a hammer or a saw. And when you buy a hammer or a saw, you buy the one that drives nails or cuts wood the best. You don't think about which one looks the coolest or which one looks most like what I think a hammer should look like. Hopefully you're trying to find the one that actually does the job the best. Or if somebody's engineering it, they're going to engineer it so it does this job the best. And that's what I want for a bicycle. What is it that I'm doing? I'm taking my body across the earth, over varied terrain, over periods of time, in different weather. I need this bicycle to be able to do this for me. So if I think about things like trends and fashions about what things look like, where people say, oh, your handlebar looks funny, or I can't stand that tube, or we have these wheels look so big. You know, when 29ers first came out, wheels look so big, and now with 29 plus, we hear people, it still looks so big, or the bicycle will look big, and so they think it handles big. But it's not always about how something looks; it's about how it functions and how it works. So I'm always trying to, think to myself that it's all about the function. It's not about the fashion. We want the bike to work the best it can be. Don't try to go for style and looks, because if you do that, you'll be sacrificing the function.